Mychael Danna, a great composer. People in the know recognize the name automatically for a long-time collaboration he's had with director Adam McGoyan, Exotica, and all these great films that he's behind. And Mychael has a really colorful, rich career. Movies like Girl Interrupted, Bounce, The Guys, Capote. He's worked with Gilliam on Tideland and his upcoming film, The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, which is Heath Ledger's last film. Little Miss Sunshine, and then he can do something like 500 Days of Summer and Surf's Up, I believe. Surf's Up.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing the range that he has. I mean, it's just really incredible.
Yeah, he's terrific. And he talked to us a lot about the craft of film composition, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this interview. Here's Mychael Danna.
It's maybe a cliche, but I mean, it really was the first thing I wanted to be when I was a little kid. My dad was a singer, and I just remember hearing things when I was, some of my earliest memories sitting and listening to him sing, and just thinking, not that I wanted to be a singer at all. I never did for a second, but I just wanted to know who it was that, wrote the notes on the page, and that really never changed.
Was it rock or pop or jazz that you were particularly influenced by at a young age, or was it an eclectic mix?
It's interesting, now that I have a young son myself, it's interesting to watch how people just gravitate, and like I said, it's not so much what other people are doing, but you just kind of gravitate. I mean, my dad loved, opera and jazz, as a matter of fact, and I have, I don't really have any interest. I mean, that jazz is like maybe the one kind of music that I really don't have an affinity and an interest in. So, it's not so much what you're exposed to. What I'm saying is, it doesn't matter how much, Bach I play for my kid. If he doesn't, if he wants to hear, Huey Lewis and the News, and that's kind of what he's going to gravitate towards. It's just interesting what, but when I was a little kid, I gravitated towards, Baroque music, strangely enough, and then, I grew up in a time of the progressive rock movement, and that was, a very exciting combination of things that I was interested in, folk music, classical music, and as well as rock and roll, and all those things came together with electronics, which was also something that I was really interested in, and so that I played in bands when I was a teenager, but by the time I was later on in my teens, I wanted to study composition at university, and that's what I ended up doing.
That was in Toronto?
That's right,
yeah. And you composed for the theater there, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Well, when I was an undergraduate, I was interested in just kind of doing anything to do with writing music. I wanted to write music, and yet I also wanted to get paid to write music. I mean, that's kind of a practical sideline that a lot of my fellow students weren't that interested in. So it was a matter of looking around at the world and what it was that where were composers needed. And I volunteered at the theater on campus, and I did sound effects and music for them, and that was one of the many things that I did. But while I was doing that, I met another undergraduate who was writing plays and having them performed, and that was Atom McGoyan, and then he went on to make films, of course, and so really, it was kind of just serendipity that we happened to meet, and neither of us was all that interested in film. That's not why I became a composer at all. I was never interested in film music when I was growing up. I wasn't really that interested in film, period. And neither was he. He was interested in theater and writing and stand-up comedy, strangely enough, which surprises people given his
I would never have guessed that with him. And I just watched Adoration a couple of months ago, so I wouldn't have guessed that. Okay.
Well, he's an extremely funny person in a very, very dark and dry way, and I think he would have been way too far ahead of his time as a stand-up comedian.
He would have been. I mean, and it's good to know that. That's good to know. Someone, because the films are so serious in that regard, at least.
Well,
it's good to know that he does have that sense of humor.
He does, and if you sit with Adam and watch one of his films that other people, are, and obviously he's a very serious and a very brilliant, intellectual, but he finds a lot of things hilariously funny in his films that I think other people would find it very enlightening to sit beside him while he's watching one of his films.
I would love to sit beside him for the last one, Adoration, just because I found that a fascinating film, and it wasn't at all what I expected from the trailer.
Yeah.
It's one thing, and when you're watching it personally find the trailer very misleading.
Yeah.
But the film itself is just downright fascinating.
Yeah.
And his use of time, his use of structure, how he tells a story is, I have never seen anything like it, starting with, for me at least, when I first watched Exotica and so on. It's just amazing.
It's something that and I think it's been, for a composer, he's been an amazing collaborator, and his work has been something that really brings out the best in a composer, and that he does tell his stories, in a different way. Obviously, we're used to narrative film where there's a beginning, middle, and end, and we follow a timeline. But for Adam, things, the timeline is not necessarily the thing that links the film together. It might be an emotional line or a thematic line and then therefore the music has a bigger role to play, in a sense, in drawing things together, in keeping an emotional continuity, and in explaining kind of underlying. I mean, there's so much suppression, in a sense, in many of his characters. They're often damaged.
Mm-hmm.
They have mysterious outward manifestations of things that we don't really understand. We know that they're acting strangely, but we don't really know why. And there's something hidden, which the music has the ability to expose and to basically work on that level, and that's really that's an amazing place for a composer to get to play.
Okay. Well, I'm curious, because your collaborations with him, they've been so successful, and you've had numerous collaborations with him. What clicks between the two of you? It's my first part of the question, and do you find a benefit in working with the same director multiple times?
Well, the second question first. Yeah, it's an amazing experience, and I wish every composer could have that experience of working with a composer-director collaborations in repeated ways, because you really are able to get, the first film that you work on a director, no matter how simpatico you are out of the gate, there's still a huge learning curve, and there's a trust curve. The director's been working on this film for 2 years or so, and they have, obviously a great deal of, tied up in the film in every way, and for them to, and they're directors. I mean, they want to direct, and they want to have control over what it is that they're trying to say, and to hand over such an emotionally, valuable part of the film over to somebody else in a way that is a language that they don't necessarily speak. It's an incredible leap of faith, and you have to, as a composer, you have to understand that a lot of the, a lot of the situations that you end up in are just simply that, and you have to, you have to be compassionate about the situation that they're coming from, and so you spend much of the first film just kind of getting that trust and gaining that trust, and once you've written a score for a film and it becomes their score too, of course, because it's a collaboration, and once you've crossed that bridge, then you're in a whole new territory on the next film. You have such a place to start from, and The language is quicker and simpler, and you've had a lot more insight into their character and they into yours, and a lot of it is just getting used to each other and understanding how the other person thinks, and so after 20 years that Adam and I have been working together, it's kind of indescribable. I mean, I just today, literally 2 hours ago, I just came home from the studio, the final day of mixing on Chloe, which is Adam's latest film, and it was a fantastic experience, and I think my scores for his films are amongst the strongest things I've ever done, and I think it's simply because there's a sense of play and fun. We've got past the trauma and the heartache of the early parts of the collaboration. Not that we ever even had that, but it's fun. I don't know any other way to describe it, and very often it's not fun. You're trying to unravel situations, and so it's my core collaboration.
Typically, when are you called upon to climb on board a project, and when would you ideally like to be called upon?
Well, that's another thing. When you work with someone repeatedly, you get to read drafts of scripts very early on. You're part of the project from its inception, and so the director is writing it with your voice in mind, and they want your feedback on the script, and so that's also another huge strength of getting in early and having that long-term relationship. That being said, I think the valuable part of seeing a script of a film that you're about to work on is to understand the director's relationship with the material. Musically, I don't think I've ever read a script and had a sound in mind that had anything to do with the final film, because the medium is completely different from typed words on a page.
Right.
But what's important is to start the relationship between you, the film, and the director. So when is the ideal time? Well, that is the ultimate ideal time, but really the typical time is when the film is, the shooting is ended and they walk into the editing room. That's the best time, because that's when the temporary score is going to get put onto the film, and if you can have any say on that can be very, very helpful, because otherwise choices get made that will be very hard to unmake,
Well, in terms of composing those first notes, let's take Time Traveler's Wife, for example, which is one of your latest scores. What do you have to understand before those first notes come to you about the film?
The questions that you ask the director are, why did you make the film? What do you like about the material? What is it that what are you saying? What is it that you feel the strengths and weaknesses are of where you are sitting here looking at your picture? If you can understand those things and starting out with those kind of big questions, those big philosophical questions, then you can start to put it together. I think you mustn't start writing anything until you have an idea of those, and not only the director. It depends on the structure, the power structure of the film. Sometimes films are producer driven, sometimes they're studio driven, they're director driven, picture editor driven, and the ultimate nightmare experience. But whatever it is that you need to understand, which voices are the ones to listen to. The films that I'm most attracted to are the ones where it's one person and it's the director.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, they're the most fun artistically, and but I've worked on many films where that's not the case, and I think you can find a path in all of them to get to a great score and a great film. it can be more complicated, and you end up spending a lot more time on that part of the process than writing music sometimes, just coming to an understanding of what it is that people want out of the picture, the different people want.
Is there a danger for a composer of being typecast?
Absolutely, and that's, I recently turned down something for that exact reason, that I've done a couple of pictures in a row that are in a, and they're very, very different, but they're in a kind of area of a genre. And
right.
I don't want to, I've been very fortunate by accident, I have to confess, in the early part of my career, but just kind of being all over the map as far as the kind of material and being able to do, things from, Little Miss Sunshine on one end of the spectrum to, darker things like The Ice Storm,
right.
And being able to work in, and then pictures that are based on relationships like Time Traveler's Wife or 500 Days of Summer, and all kinds of historical things and science fiction things, and that I really, really treasured that part of my career, and it's something that, honestly, it happened by accident with me, but I think a lot of composers do get. I mean, it's simple. You do a picture that's like something else. You're watching that film, and you note the composer's name, and you call him, and then he ends up doing 4 in a row like that, and then that's, he's stuck in that corner. And it's happened to a lot of people who, and if you talk to those composers, they're usually pretty unhappy about that.
I would imagine it would burn you out too. I mean, it would just creatively burn you out.
Absolutely. I mean, you can work on 2 films at once. If they're opposite, it's quite, I won't say easy, but it's much simpler than if they're similar. Then you have, then you have problems. But you're able to keep them separate in your mind, and you just mine from a whole different part of your internal world. And like you say, you don't kind of run that well dry by doing the same thing over and over again.
Well, let me ask you this, though. You talked about, the different kind of like director-driven, producer-driven, studio-driven films. When you're done with your score, when you're done with initially, who has the final say? Who, is it the director or the producer, or is it like a focus group almost, or what's been your experience?
Well, it can be, and the answer can be any of those things. And I think you have to, in order to be a successful film score composer, you have to be very sensitive to picking up, what the answer to that question is that you just asked.
Right.
The smaller art films are much simpler. They're generally the director, and that's the end of the story.
Right.
But as the film gets bigger, you've got music departments, you've got heads of music, you've got all kinds of voices, and absolutely valid voices that you have to listen to and you have to take into account. I always, I think you're best off if you listen to the director, that you talk to the director about any other opinions that come up, that that's a discussion. All the voices are welcome, all the opinions are welcome, but I do try and kind of narrow it down to, at the end of the day, it's me and the director saying, okay, well, here's what, we got this note, we have this person who thinks this, how do we address that? What do you want to do? I think otherwise it just can fly off into, complete confusion.
Right.
So the answer is, for me, the director, always the director. You come back to that, but certainly you have to take into account the other voices.
Right.
Now, Jerry, you actually had a question about 500 Days, didn't you?
Yeah, I do have a question. When doing like a film like that where there's a lot of outside music that you're incorporating into the film, I was curious, what is, obviously the Smiths are integral to the story because he's listening to them in that great scene in the elevator, a beautiful scene. Who doesn't want to be serenaded by a Zooey Deschanel? But what I was curious about, do you have a say in what, like, the groups that you're going to use, like the bands or that?
Very rarely. It's very unusual that the composer is part of that discussion.
Okay.
In that particular film, the Mark, the director, has a very close relationship with pop music, and he, that's his field really.
Right.
Since he's a far greater expert in it than I am. So I love the songs he put together, and I thought they were brilliant, every single one, and so they were all in place. I think virtually every single one was in place by the time I saw the film the first time. So that really helps my job in that you're presented with parts of the puzzle already, in a sense, that you work around, and so your score has to be able to work within that universe that's already been that has already begun construction. And in the case of 500 Days, that really helped us. I think in a sense, the score, we wanted to, we already had kind of that from the pop music we were getting certain elements, but we didn't want to repeat that. We wanted the music to do something maybe a little deeper and a little different, but still be from a world that's not completely disassociated. So, a 90-piece orchestra would not really make sense in the world where the Smiths live necessarily. I mean, it could, but it just seemed that something more intimate and a little more
delicate.
Delicate, exactly.
Instrumental was beautiful. I thought it complemented the choices that he made. I mean, they were just really seamless almost.
Yeah, I mean, Mark was a fantastic collaborator to work with, just for that reason that he knows pop music, and he knows, he's got a great musical knowledge, and certainly, that really kind of made it a very kind of educated collaboration in that way.
Right.
I want to ask you about one other collaboration before I let you go. And this is just an incredibly wildly imaginative filmmaker that you've worked with a couple of times now, and that's Terry Gilliam.
Right.
You've done the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, is that?
That's right, that's correct, yes.
Tell me about that experience.
Well, and again, working with Terry twice, and you have, you start, especially on this film, because it was very, the schedule was pretty chaotic, and, frankly, I think Terry thrives in that world of complete chaos and with, almost a medieval sense of complete, just breakdown of civilization, sort of the sense of working on a film with Terry. But that being said, it's an incredibly rich, creative environment, and Terry is the biggest cheerleader for the score that you could want. He's incredibly enthusiastic and generous, and just excited about the ideas as they're coming, and guides it, but in a very, very positive way. He's got extraordinary energy, and he has a sense of music, not in a way like Mark does, let's say, but he has a sense of the amount of energy and the kind of sonic impact that so he would in a very Python-esque way would hum or make noises as to what the score should be doing at a given point. It'd be this would be and so you would get this kind of aural finger painting in a sense, and but honestly, it was extremely helpful, and we would remember that as we were working on it, where he wanted the impact and with the general kind of density of it, and though you get a lot of information out of Terry's, speech patterns in that way. So it was again, just he's a fantastic collaborator, and just a very positive kind of force, and I think the film turned out really beautifully, and I really hope people get to see it soon.